But the government says the lack of money has held back the implementation of the Right to Information law. The law, first mooted in 1999, was passed and signed into law last year, with implementation expected to kick in this year. But Selassie Spencer, a technical officer from the Ministry of Information, which has been leading efforts to have the law take effect, has been telling journalists in Accra today that raising money has been a challenge.
Last year, when the act was passed into law, the Ministry of Information set up an implementation secretariat to oversee the entire implementation process. The secretariat then began working on an implementation roadmap, where afterwards we met with CSO, some CSO players, we met with UNESCO, we met with some other stakeholders to deliberate on this implementation roadmap, which we, at the end of the day, adopted and decided to work with. However, again, the reality was we had a plan, but then the lack of funding more or less affected a great part of this implementation process. So as a ministry, what we decided to do was to revise the plan and to have the activities within the plan segregated into two categories. One was to begin to take on activities that did not require so much funding, and then defer the other part of the implementation processes that required heavy funding into this year, when some money could be made available.
Well, we've been speaking to some journalists on what they feel about this. Watch.
I have been part of this process. I've been following for a while, and I think it has delayed too much, because every day they keep telling us, okay, this is the time we are going to implement it. I remember somewhere last year they said this year, early January, they are going to start the implementation. And now I come here and the Ministry of Information rep is telling us it was due to funding, and there are they need to have some trainings done. And I'm like, who is supposed to provide the funding in the first place? And if you know you don't have the funding, then why do you promise us that you are going to start the implementation this year? So for me, I think it's, kind of a deliberate attempt just to halt the process and, and to ensure that we don't get to implement it. Because, this thing is really for journalists. A lot of journalists were happy when it was passed, because we thought, it is going to help us get information easily. But with the delays and especially the funding aspect, I think it's a deliberate process. And
I can see that certain things have been put in place for the smooth implementation, but I don't think implementation has started. Because for me, I feel that when you say implementation has started, it means that I can easily walk to a government institution and I'll get the information I need. If not, refer to another institution where they have that information that I need. So based on the information that the government official is giving us now, they are still training people, they are still orienting or sensitizing officers. So I think they've started plans to implement, but implementation hasn't started for me. Yeah.
Well, after it was passed, we all remember that the president assented to it, but then we were told that early this year we were going to see the implementation. Now, as at now, we are in July, and it appears that the process has slowed. Though we are being told that there are other things, sensitization and the engagement of some public institutions and all that. The question is, we've delayed, and that is what we were told. We were told that from January 2020, we're going to see an implementation. So even though some engagements are ongoing and all that, the question is, has there been an explanation to the citizenry and all of us as to what process or what stage we've got into? And I think to that end, we've not been forthcoming, and the implementation for me hasn't been that good.